Hello and welcome, YouTubers and gamers. Drummer Dreamer here. As my first impressions and review video had quite a surprising number of views so far, at least quite surprising for me, given the scale of my humble little channel, I wanted to make another video on how the game looks and plays after Hotfix 1.06 as a token of my appreciation. I believe it also makes sense as I am 50 plus hours in and have been able to experience quite a bit more in comparison, both in terms of story progression as well as open world exploration and content, such as side missions, gigs, and so on and so forth. Quick side note before we get this thing going. A lot of you have asked me about the specific graphics settings that I have. Therefore, I believe it is worth mentioning at this point that I'm playing the game on my Xbox One X with 4K on and HDR off, as my current monitor does not support HDR. I guess I was being somewhat a little cheap when I bought it. Nevertheless, in my defense, the price difference was quite high back then, and not a lot of games were supporting HDR. I will probably upgrade to an HDR capable monitor when I upgrade to a Series X. My in-game graphics settings have the film grain and chromatic aberration turned off. Naturally, I tweaked my gamma settings accordingly, however, as that would vary in every monitor, there is no single magical setting that I could possibly recommend. I wouldn't worry too much about it, tweak it to your heart's content, basically. Fact of the matter is, it probably wouldn't make a huge difference in visual fidelity if you were to go ahead and disable all five that are available for consoles. Those five being film grain, chromatic aberration, depth of field, lens flare, and motion blur. Arguably, it could improve the performance a tad more as there would be less calculations to make and therefore less numbers to churn that your console has to worry about. That is pretty much everything that can be said about the graphics settings. At least for consoles, there is not much you're in control of anyway. All right, now that we have that out of our way, I guess it is time we talk about the game a little more and maybe revisit some of my earlier remarks to update as well as build on top of them where necessary. Again, to get it out of my system as early as possible. My overall view about Cyberpunk 2077 has not changed a lot after doubling my playtime and then some. If anything, I like it even more than before now, and now that I have seen and experienced quite a bit more of the story in the open world, well, including naturally more bugs and glitches and playability issues and observable performance degradation after the hotfixes and so on and so forth, I still believe that this is a beautiful game that deserves a lot more love and appreciation than it is currently getting, albeit with a lot of room for development for the better, of course. I suppose the developers, in an attempt to make the game at least playable on base current-gen consoles, rushed the last hotfix and probably even the one before that, 1.05, and I think it is not entirely absurd to speculate that they have caused a lot of regression in the process. My observation is that 1.04 definitely worked considerably more stable than its successors. The game looks a lot downgraded now in comparison. Now the game, even though still very much playable and enjoyable, has all those issues people have been complaining about prior to the hotfix. The hotfix 1.04 come back, and such as the stutter, screen tear, significant FPS drops, especially in densely populated areas such as the city center or heavy traffic you may encounter during driving, object or texture pop-ins, problems with draw distance, edge flickering, illumination and shadow problems, to name a few. To be fair though, I have not experienced any crashes since the first hotfix, the hotfix 104. I hope CDPR will address a majority of those, if not all, with the patches they plan and announce to release in January and February, respectively. Fingers crossed. In my previous video, I stated that the protagonist does not click with me, and it is not believable. I also left some room for error in my statement that it may change as the story progresses. And my goodness, that precisely was what happened, and I'm so glad and not really that ashamed to admit that I was inaccurate in my first impression. In a way, I'm glad I was wrong. Now I think I know why it is the way it is, and why V as a character feels so generic and seems not to have much of a personality or gravitas. It obviously was a creative choice, a brilliant way of storytelling by the writers, making V feel someone and no one at the same time, but so that we as players would fill that void with our own personality using the choices and dialogue options at our disposal. In a way, V is all of us and none of us at the same time. And besides, it is not like a strong and dominant character such as Geralt of Rivia in Witcher, or Adam Jensen in Deus Ex, or Master Chief in Halo, with strong motives are needed anyway, at least not in this game's context. More importantly, I think the main story is not about V necessarily, but instead more about the discovery of V's place in all this. Better yet, our discovery of V's path and place in all this. Pretty much a regular John or Jane Doe being caught inside all these events by happenstance, people and circumstances in direct relation to how these events unfold. Our discovery of how the increasingly intriguing relationship between V and Johnny Silverhand unfolds. And now I think that is simply genius. Hats off to CDPR once more for their amazing storytelling. I also was incorrect about Keanu Reeves' delivery as Johnny Silverhand, as now I cannot get enough of him. He simply is probably the most likable or relatable asshole there is. I will now move on because I don't think I will be able to get into any further details without either giving spoilers or prolonging this video just on the story alone, which I reckon wouldn't be very pleasant, let alone interesting for many of you listening to me blabber about it for another 15 to 20 minutes. But there's a whole lot to talk about, but maybe in another video. Suffice to say, I stand corrected in terms of the main protagonists. However, I stand by my remark on how amazing the story is. It seems to only get better as you progress. I guess by now you probably have been quite overwhelmed by cyberpunk related content on YouTube, where the majority of them are pieces slamming the game about its broken state or making fun of it and creating memes and so on and so forth. It's broken promises, it's this and it's that. Again, I would like to stress the fact that I personally did not experience any game-breaking issues so far. Please don't get me wrong, I had my fair share of bugs and glitches where, for example, I was not able to pick up a legendary loot drop, even though the weapon clearly was there lying on the ground. The menu, for some reason or the other, did not show up, no matter from which angle I approached it, or its yellow sign to indicate that it's a legendary item. Or where I engaged in a firefight, or many firefights for that matter, where I was not able to draw my weapon, no matter what I did. So I had to run away, find a relative safe spot, and check my inventory, switch guns back and forth just to fix that, and jump back into the firefight again. Or in one of the main missions, how I managed to get stuck on a ledge after falling through the catwalk and finding myself stranded there. I jumped down to kill myself and started from the last checkpoint, which I have to say it is quite fortunate to have a lot of them in the game. Those are only to name a few. As a grumpy old gamer dad, a member of the old guard, or a geriatric gamer if you will, I also happen to have a habit of constantly saving my progress whenever the game permits me to do so, especially in games like these, so no major problems there. So I suppose it all boils down to how tolerant you are to these types of issues. If you can laugh about it and move on, you're more or less like me. But if you're the kind to break your mouse or keyboard or controller over this, you should probably stay away at least for another couple of months and check back and check some videos after the patches are released. As mentioned a number of times already, I personally don't mind, and they don't take away the entertainment value from me. Granted, it is much like having a quirky toaster that I could still make a decent toasted bread, ignoring unevenly toasted parts or scraping off some burnt bits, whereas for most others, the same toaster either doesn't work at all or chars the bread beyond recognition on one side and doesn't do anything on the other. Anyway, I digress. Let's look at some of the stuff that you may or may not have heard dozens of times elsewhere already. Again, in no particular order, just like the previous video, and with no intention to slam the game, as that would be disingenuous because I already said many times that I enjoy the game very much. These are just some further notes I would like to share with you. First off, the AI. I mean, the AI is quite serviceable, especially when you're going out and about in Night City, where you would notice rather quickly that the NPCs are dumb as a rock, including the drivers, and especially the drivers, I guess, that easily get perplexed when you do even the trivial stuff such as getting out of your car and leaving your car slightly on the road in the traffic, I guess. They just sit there and don't even bother traversing that area by passing the obstacle, in this case, your car or your bike. It is quite rudimentary. During combat, however, did not feel that AI to be that rudimentary in comparison, but you would probably definitely feel that they're not clever as well. Sometimes they rush rapidly, trying to overwhelm you. Other times they just stay stuck behind a cover, waiting for you to rush and close up obliterate them with a shotgun or a blade, for example. I observed some cover to cover movement here and there, but did not experience any strategic flanking action. Again, much better than the regular NPCs, but still pretty dull. Next, we have inventory management, which is it's a big issue for me because it quickly becomes a serious irritation, to say the least, as it gets bloated with all the junk you have to hoard to make some extra cash. As mentioned in my previous video, the in-game economy doesn't seem quite there yet, and it needs some serious optimization because anything that slightly matters for your character build is freakishly expensive to buy, and unfortunately for that very reason you need to make money, and therefore you need to sell all this junk. You need all this junk to sell, basically. Now that we are talking about inventory management, I guess it is safe to say it's somewhat weak in its functionality and its menu design as well. There is no option to set an item as favorite, for example, which makes it very annoying to wrangle unequipped items you want to keep, as all the stuff you hoard inevitably obscures your overview in this bloated mess. Doesn't matter how you choose to sort them, you ultimately find yourself trying to determine whether the one you're about to sell or dismantle is the one you want to keep, or a version of the same item that you recently looted, or something like that. You can always buy back if you make a mistake, with some money lost, of course. But if you accidentally dismantle a favorite item, you can kiss it goodbye for good. To be fair, on the positive side of things, I think it is a very neat idea that the developers put a feature that you're able to access your stash on the go via the trunk of your cars, so that if you're away from any vendor or a point of sale and would like to move on to your next objective, and don't want to take a detour or an additional stop, you can call your car and stash some of it to open up some space in your inventory using that feature, which is kind of cool. This next one is, I believe, also quite common among gamers. It's like common annoyance among gamers as far as I can see, so I'm glad that I'm not the only one hating this. The way it works currently with clothing is very, very much arbitrary, and I'm not sure who made this choice to design the most dreadful clothing in the game. But if you do care about the armor score and attributes of what you put on more than it looks, which is the obvious logical choice for most of us, there is a good chance that you might end up looking like a total clown or cyber douche instead of cyberpunk. Not sure if that is easily fixable, but it definitely needs some serious overhaul going forward. I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, it is simply beyond me as to why a janky zebra pattern bandana has a plus 15% crit chance because of an unremovable mod, or why a horrendous looking tank top has better armor than an actual ballistic vest, or why a pair of sweatpants provides better protection against status effects than an actual pair of outdoor pants. So let's leave it at that. Next up, we have map and navigation, which is for the most part I find quite okay. However, due to its sheer size and the number of points of interests, quests, gigs, and vendors, and Ripper docks, and so on and so forth, or side missions, even with the filtering options in place, it is quite overwhelming at times to remember where you were, or if you were to go back to a location you have visited before. But the mini-map definitely needs a facelift, as it seems it was designed for the pace of walking and running at best, but unfortunately it is pretty much useless when driving, especially in a fast vehicle, as it does not scale and adapt to the speed which you are traversing the same distance. As a result, I don't even remember how many times I missed an exit or a turn and had to slam the brakes to stop and turn around. Crafting is still pointless in the game, in my opinion, which is a shame, as it could have been a little bit balanced so that it could make more sense. Before I wrap up, I should probably mention the constant calls and text messages from fixers or some side characters getting very annoying very quickly, as even though I understand that it's part of the game and it's part of the game's rich content, it often gets in the way of what you actually want to do or what you're trying to do at any given time. Besides, it also bloats the lists in your journal, as there's no way of dropping or archiving a quest so that it no longer shows up on your list. Well, I guess that's about for this one. I was trying to avoid another long video, but there was indeed a lot to talk about. And believe it or not, I did drop some less interesting and trivial stuff. Well, Cyberpunk 2077 is massive. It is ambitious in many regards, and granted, there are a lot of missed opportunities and maybe even poor execution to a certain degree. However, I think it deserves a lot more praise than it's currently getting. Personally, I have all the confidence that CDPR is going to fix the majority of those issues, those current issues, as it is too big of an IP to fail from a pure corpo standpoint, even. Has even greater potential to grow and reach new levels and live up to the somewhat inflated expectations and hype. The world of Cyberpunk, and particularly Night City, feels like an actual place that has its own life of some sort and simply doesn't care if you're there to experience it or not. It feels like a place that you would like to visit again and again, even just to wander around the streets with no particular thing to do. I often find myself taking a walk, enjoying the amazing vistas, the architecture, the uniqueness of different parts of the city, and how organic they are constructed, and the mind-blowing attention to detail. Obviously, it's not an actual place, and it is in fact an intricate piece of software, carefully crafted by a very skillful, resourceful, and creative group of people to make you feel exactly that. I believe that alone is simply a testament to how massive an undertaking this is, and that alone, I think it is a good reason to give this game a chance. If you can, of course, because it is very clear to me that the people that I mentioned earlier, that same talented and creative group of people, have put a lot of hard work and passion and love into what they have created. All the corpo nonsense aside, if given time and opportunity, I'm sure the developers have what it takes to turn all this negativity around, as they obviously have an amazing vision for their creation. How Cyberpunk's own story will unfold obviously remains to be seen. However, despite all the things that it does poorly or does not do at all, is lacking, this game, on the other hand, has definitely gets so many things right and could easily become the best game of the last decade. All right, that's it. I wish you all a happy, healthy, and prosperous new year. Stay safe, everyone. Drummer Dreamer signing off. Peace.